You know that two wrongs do not make a right. Simone said, oh, I know. That's why I'm not trying to make a right. I'm trying to make it even. I have no plans to be one of them battered women that end up dead at the hands of her stud. And I'm not lowering my value by cheating back. I've got something way better in mind. This is Bedtime Stories, Grown-Up Edition, Season 16, Genesis, the Introduction. I hope that you are as excited as I am to get this new season going. Because when we left off in Season 15, Poetic Justice, it was a whole lot of going on. In Denton, Texas, USA, Angela Lorraine Spencer Washington St. James was absolutely speechless. She prided herself on being a woman who was honest, but the role that she'd voluntarily assumed in the Lopez family criminal organization had her between a rock and a hard place. She just told a bold-faced lie to Benjamin Woodrow Stevens Jr. Big Wood to most, Woody to some. The best friend of her husband Q, Quincy Anders St. James IV. Woody was lying in a hospital bed in Denton, Texas, at the family complex, in the guest room of the guest house, owned by his mother, Miss Charlotte, and his stepfather, Samuel Baptiste, the retired kingpin of the Baptiste crime family. Wood was recovering from 3 gunshot wounds and a head wound that he sustained during Operation Last Touch. Now, if you're new here, you don't have to go all the way back to Season 1. You can actually go back to Season 15, where I give a pretty thorough recap of where we are, how we got here, and all the goings on. Or you can just jump right in where we are right now. Because I've been telling this story here for over a year. And I think I might have these introductions down pat. So check it right. The Notorious Five Families were under attack, and the call was coming from inside the house. Stanley Charles, the son of Nadia Charles, the sister of the head of the Charles family, out of St. Lucia, Idra Charles, conspired with an international trafficking organization to take out and take down key players in the Notorious Five Families. Why, you might ask? Oh, because Stanley's biological father, Manuel Manny Lopez, just happened to be the kingpin of the Lopez family out of Puerto Rico. And the revelation of this nearly 40-year secret was at the heart of why Stanley was so willing to turn snake on the people who'd been there for him his entire life. Also, Stanley had secrets. Secrets that had the potential to ruin his reputation, wind his behind up in jail, or the grave. Secrets that he was hell-bent on keeping under wraps. But he was also determined to punish all of the individuals who he personally held responsible for keeping him from what he believed he deserved, his rightful place in the Lopez family and criminal organization. Well, Stanley wound up dead. Both he and his skeletons were already out of the closet. But before he died, he decided that not even death would keep him from retribution. See, Stanley's problem is like so many people. He was not satisfied with his lot in life. And having an undiagnosed and untreated mental illness certainly did not help. Having 2 loving parents in Nadia and Anan, and having the opportunity to replace his uncle Idra as the head of the Charles family criminal organization did not compare to what he believed he was due. You know what they say. Misery loves company. And the letters that Stanley left for some everybody, his biological father, his biological mother, his stepmother, Marisol, his siblings, Dr. Miranda, Dr. Maribel, and Lorenzo, and his cousins, Angela and her sister Stephanie, made it painfully clear that Stanley intended to make everybody's lives miserable before his story was finished being told. The problem with monsters is they have a habit of multiplying, and they do not take too kindly to anything or anybody interfering with their ability to do that. That international trafficking organization that I told you about, a bunch of monsters. And they were flailing for purchase after multiple raids, arrests, and deaths, courtesy of Angela's husband Q's work with the FBI, HSA, and the vice president of the good old US of A. Now, that work was done in combination with Q's role as co-owner of a Texas PI firm and his role as the reluctant head of the St. James criminal organization out of Trinidad. Now, I know what you're thinking. When since did the government start conspiring with criminals to take out other criminals? Actually, you can't be thinking that, because that's a story almost as old as Moses and them. Which is precisely why this is the part of the story where I tell you that this is fiction. Any similarities to real life events is purely coincidental. Because I don't know nothing about nothing. Now back to the story. So Q loves God and his family. And while he prefers to be on the right side of the law, he's been known to collaborate with the Notorious Five Families a time or two to keep his family safe. He's primarily the head of the St. James family in name only because his deceased Uncle Nigel, who used to be the kingpin, his wife, Catherine, is the real brains behind the operation. His mother, Queen B, the Queen Mother, Bella Baptiste St. James, is the head of the Baptiste family, also out of Trinidad. There's the Garcia family, headed up by Alejandro Garcia out of Colombia. And Alejandro just happens to be Big Wood's second cousin. And Q conspired with them, along with the Charles and Lopez families, to deal blow after blow against that international trafficking organization. Q's mission was to decimate and destroy the trafficking organization. It had touched too many people that he loved. His brother and best friend Wood, and his very own daughter, Melissa. And he was after the HN and HBICs. He wanted every last one of them, either doing Fed time or in a grave, whichever was most expedient. He also wants out of the life as quickly as possible as well, because this whole kingpin thing is temporary. His cousin, his Uncle Nigel's oldest son, Sincere, is being trained to take over the role. Now, as you would expect, the traffickers did not take too kindly to having their operations interrupted. They went on the offensive back when Q was working for the feds full time and was not in the life. Their goal was to end Q's career, but they'd miscalculated severely. When they went after his adopted daughter, Melissa, they attempted to kidnap her from her seminary in North Carolina because they thought that they were just dealing with an overzealous federal agent. They had no clue that Melissa was connected because her father was connected, and those connections ran deep. The Notorious Five Families had been a force to be reckoned with in the criminal underworld for over 100 years. They were successful because of the allegiances that they were able to make within their respective organizations and their ability to manipulate their family members into creating bonds not easily broken. Hence the friendships, marriages, and offspring. So the only way in for the trafficking organization was to do what they'd been doing best for decades. Find secrets, exploit them, and then use those who have a vested interest in keeping those secrets secret. And that was the catalyst for Operation Last Touch. All of the necessary players in the Five Families worked together to orchestrate a plan that included Big Wood, his would-be baby's mama, Amira Ali, the sister of Amir Ali, also deceased, whose own diabolical plot actually created the opening for the trafficking organization in Stanley. And she was also the sister of Wisdom Ali, also known as Wise, the husband of Salima Baptiste Ali, 29 weeks pregnant and the front runner for head of the Baptiste family in her Aunt Bella's place. Salima is also the only daughter of her father, Samuel Baptiste, and Manny Lopez's deceased sister, former queenpin, Selena Lopez Baptiste. The family's plan was simple: lure anyone within the organizations that was behind the plot against the families and in cahoots with the trafficking organization. And the operation was a success. As a matter of fact, the day was saved by one true Joy Burton, 27 weeks pregnant, engaged to Big Wood, and the right hand in training of Stephanie, who also happens to be 30 weeks pregnant and vying for the position of queenpin of the Lopez family. When Operation Last Touch ended, Amira and her unborn baby were memories. Thousands of operatives with the international trafficking organization were arrested, captured, or killed. And hundreds of the Charles family's soldiers were also captured or killed. Unfortunately, though, Stanley had already put his final play in motion. When he was in the hot seat at the round table, courtesy of Angela, Stanley signaled his right hand in training and pulled the trigger on the release of invaluable information on every member of the Lopez, Baptiste, St. James, Charles, and Garcia organizations and families. The Round Table is a meeting held by the Five Families that includes all of the heads, their right hands, and the key players in any major operation, deal, or power move. At the end of the most recent Round Table, Stanley ended up deceased, receiving the poetic justice that he so rightly deserved. But his final play set off what could very well be a war of epic proportions. And when poetic justice ended, the families were preparing to go from the defensive to the offensive. And Angela, while not officially the head of the Lopez family and not even in training to become the head, because like her husband, she has zero interest in running a criminal organization, has found herself in a very interesting position. She's not only 32 weeks pregnant, running a multi-million-dollar hair and skincare brand called Vibrantly You, raising 5 children with her husband Q, 15-year-old Michael, 14-year-old Melissa, 9-year-old Angel, and 2-year-old twins, Isla and V, Quincy the Fifth. But she's also committed to helping the five families undergo a reorganization and a rebranding, while also hiding true. And that's where we were when season 15 Poetic Justice ended. Angela and Stephanie's estate in Denver, Colorado was under attack, with True and her one and only bodyguard, Bashian Adam, also known as Brutal Bosch, trapped on the estate and waiting for backup. So when Big Wood, who's thus far been unable to speak, used a tablet to ask Angela for an update, she informed him of the threat against True. She failed to mention that the estate was under attack. Instead, she lied and told him that she didn't know what was happening because she was waiting for an update from her temporary right-hand man, LJ, Lawrence Johnson Jr., the best friend of Angela and Q, co-owner of the PI firm, and husband of Angela's other best friend, Regina. The couple are the proud parents of 11-year-old L3, 8-year-old Lena, and 4-year-old Anders. Now, Wood hadn't said a word since he'd been shot a little over a month earlier. Initially, doctors thought he had amnesia, but they'd since diagnosed him with anomic aphasia, a language disorder that affects a person's ability to communicate effectively, typically the result of damage to the language areas of the left hemisphere of the brain. When Big Wood, who was 6'5" and over 250 pounds, took that first and second bullet, he attempted to jump out of the line of fire, but one of those bullets hit him high in the thigh, resulting in him losing control of his fall, taking a nasty blow to the head, and later being diagnosed with a brain injury. Doctors are unsure whether his difficulty finding words and using them is a result of the head injury itself, delayed treatment, or a lack of oxygen to his brain when he had to be repeatedly resuscitated. They also have no idea whether Big Wood's ability to communicate verbally will return when his brain is fully recovered. What they do know is that he understands both written and verbal language, and he's able to communicate well using a tablet. And Angela's decision to withhold information from Wood not only tested his patience, but his resilience too. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't inform you that the brain will only do what it can do. So I am not suggesting that individuals living with aphasia simply need to be determined enough to get better. Research tells us, though, that healing in general happens on a continuum, influenced by a variety of factors, and self-determination and will are two of those factors. You know what they say, where there's a will, there is absolutely a way. And Big Wood has shown that he has an unshakable will. About True, his little mama, and his unborn baby, he one way. Hell, if the man could walk independently, he'd already be in Denver, putting in work and seeing about his woman. But between the bullet that tore through his thigh and shoulder from a high-powered rifle and the brain injury he sustained, his entire right side requires extensive rehabilitation. And for the past several weeks, Big Wood has been all in, testing the limits of his physical body and doing the mental work required to get back to himself and his love. As a result, he's become angry and frustrated more times than he can count, with his inability to command his body and his words. This is a whole new world for Big Wood. He'd been a finisher since he was 15 years old, and his retirement from the life was very short-lived, because when his best friend and brother Q got pulled in to be the head of the St. James family, he was absolutely gonna have his bros back as his right hand. So with Q's wife, his sister, Angela, looking him dead in the eyes and trying to deceive him, he was 7:30 hot, angry enough to find the words to say, "You lie." And those two words were music to his mother, Miss Charlotte's ears. She asked, "What you say, son?" Big Wood raised his left arm, pointed a finger at Angela and said, "Ange, lie." Miss Charlotte and Angela just looked at one another. Angela said, "Did you just say my name? Can you say it again?" Big Wood slammed his hand on the tablet and pressed the word no over and over again. He was not in the mood for speech therapy. He wanted answers, and he wanted them immediately. Angela said, "Wood, I don't want you to be upset, especially when there isn't anything that either of us can do right now, other than pray and wait. Whatever is happening on the estate, you and I both know that True ain't going out without a fight, and Bosch would sacrifice his own life before he let anything happen to True and the baby." What Angela refused to say was that the front gate to the estate had been breached and the surveillance system was down. To make matters worse, the closest team of Lopez soldiers out of Texas had been dispatched less than an hour before, which meant True and Bosch were on their own for about 2 more hours. Meanwhile, in Miami, Catherine Montclair St. James had just finished explaining to her 19-year-old triplet stepdaughters, Simone, Chantal, and Star, 3 of the 5 children her deceased husband, Nigel St. James, had created with his also deceased ex-mistress, Annabelle, that their security was being increased and that their ability to move around freely was being limited, all due to what had been deciphered from Stanley's letters. The triplets were none too pleased. Of the 3, Simone was the most upset. Now, Catherine and Nigel's illegitimate children hadn't met until right after his death, but Catherine, also known as Twin, had made it her business to keep up with them throughout their lives. Her deceased husband, Nigel, had no idea that she knew about his 5 illegitimate children, but she'd secretly provided for them when their father was unwilling to pay for any extras, because he was already providing their mother, Annabelle, with a rather generous allowance that she was blowing. So it was Catherine who ensured that they had the medical care they needed, that they could attend quality private schools, receive lessons in the arts, self-defense, and foreign languages. She paid for the undergraduate degrees of 25-year-old Sincere and 23-year-old Saint, and was currently paying for the undergraduate degrees of the 19-year-old triplet. And while all of the children were bright, receiving scholarships and grants, she still paid the full balance, letting them keep the refunds. And they had no clue that she was the one footing the bill. Not until after their father died. They'd also recently found out just how nasty and dirty their mother was, because she was conspiring with Amir, Nigel's former right hand. And like Amir, she also paid for it with her life. So with Catherine's careful orchestration, Nigel's children had been being prepared their whole lives to take prominent roles in the St. James family's criminal organization. And Catherine stepped in to make sure that they did, as soon as their father was lowered in the ground. They had no clue what their father was really into. And because he needed to hide those children from his wife, he'd had no plans to introduce them to the life. But Catherine had made it her business to drop hints and make suggestions that led her husband to pay attention to his children's strengths and special interests, to hone those skills while they were growing up so that they would be prepared when the time came. And because he respected her gangster, he used everything that she said to do just that. As a result, Sincere was ready and willing to begin his in-depth training to become the kingpin of the St. James family. And Saint, who had actually already started his training as a finisher before his father died, was already knee-deep in putting that training to practice. And the youngest of the triplets, Star, proving that she was more than just a pretty face in designer threads. She'd become a covert operative after being the last one standing and the only one of her sisters to pass their wilderness test, conducted by Selima, Stephanie, and True. Simone had failed because she had a problem with powder. She'd had to be removed from the wilderness and taken to rehab. And it was clear that Chantal was way too committed to Christ and her pastor to do anything more than keep herself safe and defend herself if it came down to it. And she'd done that during that wilderness test. But Star, she'd shown that she was perfect for a prominent role in her family's criminal organization. And she put those skills to test during Operation Last Touch. So when Catherine informed the girls that there would be a change in protocol, Simone said, listen, with all that I got going on in my personal life, I really don't have any issue with laying low, but I got some things planned in the coming weeks that I just can't change, and I can't have no whole bunch of burly men following me around everywhere I go. Catherine said, there are only 2 weeks between now and your spring break. How much could you possibly have planned before you leave for St. Lucia for your internship? Simone, a finance student, was taking an international finance course that required that all of the students do an internship. And Angela, as part of her efforts to rebrand the 5 families, had arranged for Simone to complete her internship at a legitimate umbrella company under the Charles family's jurisdiction. The ultimate goal was for Simone to become acclimated with the legitimate business holdings of the families, learn the money, the framework, the systems, the accounting practices of the Charles family, and then play an intricate role in expanding the legitimate financial holdings of the other families. So when school ended for spring break, Simone would be heading to St. Lucia, where she'd be completing the remainder of the semester. Her university had approved her request to complete the remainder of her coursework virtually, because the opportunity for a sophomore student to complete a finance internship overseas was 1 in a million. Simone told Catherine, you told me to end things with Razor, and that's what I'm trying to do. Razor was the preferred name of Simone's on-again, off-again stud girlfriend named Raven. Their same-gender relationship had often been volatile, with both women having been the aggressors at times, but with Simone mostly the one taking the L's. Simone had been spotted quite a few times with tinted windows, busted lip scratches, and missing patches of hair, hence her preference for lace front wigs. Catherine said, I told you to end things months ago. Star said, now twin, you know how them studs are. They do not go away easily. They turn into stalkers real bad behind some good coochie. Catherine said, Star, don't be crass. Simone, do you need help? Because you know, Simone said, no, I do not need help. I'm just trying to make sure that when I cut her back this time, not only will she not come back, but she won't even want me back. Plus, I need a little get back. Do you know that nigga had the audacity to cheat on me? Simone had discovered that for all of Razor's blustering, fighting, fussing, and begging, she'd had the nerve to be unfaithful. So on top of taking L's, she was also being played, and she ain't like that. Chantal said, now, Simone, you know that two wrongs do not make a right. Simone said, oh, I know. That's why I'm not trying to make a right. I'm trying to make it even. Chantal said, please tell me you don't plan to cheat back on this girl and rub it in her face. You know that all that's going to do is make her more jealous, more angry, and more violent. I don't want to go to no more funerals. Simone said, girl, I have no plans to be one of them battered women that end up dead at the hands of her stud. And I'm not lowering my value by cheating back. I've got something way better in mind. Her birthday is next week, and I'm planning her a birthday party that she will never forget. Everybody she knows will be right there, and they're going to have a front row seat to the truth, and I'll be done with her once and for all. When Simone had tried to end things with Razor before, Razor will pull out all the stops: love bombing, gaslighting, and even using outside interference. A few months before, when Simone had tried to end things, she had the nerve to involve the few family members who hadn't cut her off when she decided to embrace her persona as Razor, and brought her relationship with Simone out in the open, and their mutual friends, and her efforts to keep Simone tied to her. At the time, Chantal had suggested that Simone tell her family and friends just how violent she was, and how controlling, manipulative, and narcissistic she was too. So Chantal asked, what happened when you told her family and friends what she'd been doing? Simone said, what you think happened? They didn't believe me. Not their niece, sister, friend. She loves you so much. She'd never do those things. Blah, blah, blah. Do you know she even had the nerve to tell them that I'd been taking boxing and martial arts lessons and testing my skills out on her? All these years we've been getting into it, I didn't have no pictures. But she did. She got them thinking that I'm the aggressor and she's the innocent victim. Well, time is out for all that. Star said, you a dummy, because I told you to call the cops the last time she put her hands on you and gave you that tinted window. Had your eye looking like a color TV. Simone said, I got you, damn dummy. Believe me, this plan I have is perfect.
You're entertaining all them girls you clown, but wouldn't